Moving on, now we see how about rent, rates, taxes, repairs, and insurance for building. This is dealt with in section 30 of the Income Tax Act. Okay. Now there can be two situations. You can either own a building and use it for the purpose of your business and profession, or you might occupy a building and use it for the purpose of your business and profession. This deduction that we are talking about, please note, is available for building used for purpose of business and profession. Okay. So it's only when it is used for the purpose of business and profession that you come under section 30. If you are using it for your home purposes, you're just living in it, then it is not covered under section 30. Right? Coming back to this. So as I told you, there can be two situations. Let's say there are two people, A and B. B owns an office in which there are two units, Unit A and Unit B. Okay. Unit B is occupied by B for the purpose of his own business and profession. While Unit A, what he does is, he's kind of let it out to A. So A is occupying this. Right? So the question which comes up is, what are the kind of deductions which are available to A and what are the deductions which are available to B? Now one common difference which is going to stay is that when A is using it, he's going to pay rent to B. Right? While B, because he's the owner of the building, you cannot pay something to yourself, right? So B will not be paying any rent. But there will be other expenses which will be incurred in respect of these buildings. Some of them could be rates and taxes. The most common being the municipal tax which are there. There could be insurance cost for the building. There can be repairs. Repairs which can be in the nature of a revenue expenses, some routine recurring repair expenses, or capital expenses, capital repairs. Now we will see that if you are occupying the building as a tenant, tenant means a person who's hired a building, who's using it on rent. Or if you are using it as an owner, in both the cases, as I said, it has to be used for the purpose of your business and profession. If not, then no deduction is allowable under section 30. So let us first examine the case of a tenant. A tenant will pay rent to the landlord or the owner, right? So whatever rent you pay is going to be allowed as a deduction under section 30. Revenue repairs. What does this mean? This basically means some routine recurring repairs, okay, which are revenue in nature. A tenant is not going to undertake capital repairs in normal circumstances, right? And revenue repairs to the extent that these are borne by the tenant. Now, what do you mean by borne? Borne means that the economic burden, okay, of these should be with the tenant. If the tenant incurs, let's say 100 rupees on repair and he recovers 100 from the owner, then effectively he's not bearing the expense. Bearing means he's incurring 100 and he's not getting anything from the owner. The third one, taxes, rates. Any kinds of rates or taxes in respect of the building are allowed as a deduction under this section. Municipal, local, and revenue on payment basis. Now this is interesting, although we are going to look at it in detail in the subsequent chapters. Not in the subsequent chapters, actually subsequent slides. But what this means is that certain expenditure which are payable to the government are allowed as a deduction only on a payment basis. What this means is that let's say you had incurred some taxes. There are some taxes due from you to the government. right? But you did not pay them. Then in that case, there's something called section 43B, which is very crucial, important, which triggers in, and in that case, these expenses are not allowed as a payment, deduction, unless and until these are paid, right? We'll see more about it in the slide which deals with section 43B. And the last one is insurance if borne by the lessee. Again, borne means the economic burden has to be with him, right? So insurance cost if paid by the tenant is also allowed as a deduction in computing his income under the head PGBP, right? Okay. Now moving to the next one, which is the owner, which was something like this guy who had the economic ownership to this building. Now in his case, what all are going to be allowed as a deduction is what we see on the right side of this slide. No rent can be debited on a notional basis. What does this mean? The tenant actually makes a payment to the owner in respect of usage of building. The owner may not pay any rent to a third party. So if you are just using your own building, you cannot debit any kind of a rent on a notional basis, saying that, oh, look, if I would have hired this building from a third party, I would have paid 500 rupees. So therefore this 500 should be debited. What if I own the building? No, that is not allowed. So no rent can be debited on a notional basis. Current repairs. Again, the reason is if it is a capital repair, you add it to the cost of the building. Taxes, rates, we've already discussed it here, so I'm not repeating it. Insurance, again, if the owner bears the cost of the insurance, then it is allowed as a deduction. Now there is one interesting concept which is there, okay, in respect of depreciation on one particular thing. Before I go take you through this, let me just again go back to the drawing board. Now we had A, we had B. B had actually let out the building to A, right? Now as A got into this building, he realized that, the structure which are put in to the building, let's say the partitions, the wooden furniture and all which are there, are too low standard. Okay, and according to the client which A has, he feels this needs to be modified, right? Normally, as we saw, a tenant is allowed a deduction only in respect of the current repairs. Okay, why? Because the capital repair is something which is the prejudice or the priority of the owner, right? Is the owner, if he incurs capital expenditure on the building, that he can capitalize it and claim depreciation on it, right? But what this section provides is that if a tenant incurs some major expenditure on creation of some structure, okay, then it will be deemed that he is the owner of the building and allowed depreciation on such expenses, right? So normally a tenant, which is this guy, is not supposed to get any kind of a deduction for capital repairs, right? But in such cases, in this specific case, it is treated as if he is the owner, okay, and if he's incurring a capital expenditure, he can capitalize it and claim depreciation on that amount. Let's now again go back to the detailed explanation for this, where the assessee has taken a building on lease. Lease is just one thing. You can have any other right of occupancy or other right of occupancy. So you are there. Capital expenditure incurred by him on construction of any structure or doing any work or by way of renovation or improvement or extinction. So let's say, for example, there was already a partition which he just got removed, extincted. to the building, then the assessee shall be entitled to depreciation on such expenditure, assuming such structure or work is owned by the assessee. This is basically nothing but explanation 1 to section 32. Okay, under this explanation, it is deemed that the assessee is the owner of the building, and therefore this is a capital expenditure which he's incurred, and therefore he should be entitled to depreciation on such amount. Right? Now, just to recapitulate the entire thing, when you incur rent, rates, taxes, repairs, and insurance in respect of a building, please note it's only building which is covered under this section. As a tenant, you get a deduction for rent, for revenue repairs, for taxes, insurance. In these three cases, the burden should be lying with the tenant. He should not recover it from the owner. Insofar as the owner is concerned, he cannot debit any kind of a rent on a notional basis. He is allowed a deduction for current repairs, taxes, and insurance. There is just one exception to the rule, that where the tenant is occupying any building as a lessee and he incurs a capital expenditure on such building, and he constructs any kind of a structure or undertakes any kind of a renovation, then he is treated as a owner. He is deemed as an owner, and therefore, because the owner is allowed to capitalize such capital expenditure, he is allowed to capitalize these expenditure and claim depreciation on them. Right?